Hey guys, tonight we're going to start our day in one of the quietest places an emperor ever called home, a Mughal garden. Just before sunrise, the grass is wet, the trees are still, and in the distance, something feathered is definitely muttering about breakfast. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun does, not because you planned to, but because the garden has its own rhythm. It nudges you into wakefulness without a single word. The stone floor beneath you is just beginning to lose its night chill, and the woven blanket at your feet smells faintly of vetiver. Somewhere, a peacock yawns, or maybe that was a rooster who lost the memo about royal decorum. You sit up slowly. The trees above you are silhouetted against a sky shifting from indigo to pearl, like a watercolor being rinsed. These are China trees, broad, leafy giants with bark that flakes like sunburned paint. Muggles loved them not just for their shade, but for the dappled light they cast, as if sunlight had to earn its way to the ground. The garden around you isn't just pleasant, it's deliberate. Every plant, every stone, every trickle of water has been placed with purpose. In Persian, it's called a charbagh, a four-part garden, inspired by Quranic descriptions of paradise. The Mughals brought the design with them when they crossed into the Indian subcontinent, adapting it with local flora, hydrology, and aesthetic flair. And let's be honest, if you could redesign heaven and still sneak in cardamom-laced tea, you probably would too. As you stand, your bare feet meet the dew-heavy path, made of small sandstone tiles cut in soft geometric curves. The stones retain the night's coolness. A mild shiver travels up your legs, but you don't mind. You are entirely alone in a garden once meant for emperors, philosophers, and poets. No phones, no traffic, just one slightly overexcited parrot somewhere in the neem tree canopy, screaming what is possibly poetry. The air is fragrant, but not in the loud, cloying way of a florist's shop. It's a blend: wet earth, faint roses, sweet basil, and distant smoke from a clay stove. You walk slowly past flower beds framed in sunken brick, laid out in long, symmetrical stretches like embroidered fabric. There's a central water channel ahead. Its low burble is the only sound more consistent than the birds. It doesn't just carry water, it divides space. These channels, part of the Nahar system, were innovations of both engineering and spiritual geometry. They mirror the four rivers of Islamic paradise water: milk, honey, and wine. Only this morning, you suspect the channel holds just water, no judgment. You pause at a small stone bench under a cypress. These trees, tall and slim, were chosen as symbols of eternity and mourning. Perfect metaphors if you're feeling a little melodramatic before breakfast. One leans slightly, maybe nudged by monsoon rains or the quiet weight of centuries. And that's the other thing here time folds gently. This garden has seen emperors ride through in brocade and gold. Gardeners crouch over bulbs in monsoon sludge. Lovers carve initials on marble ledges. And now, well, now it sees you, sleepy-eyed and slightly unsure if you're dreaming. Historians still argue whether Mughal gardens were primarily spiritual metaphors, political flexes, or very elaborate picnic spots? The truth are probably all three, because when you build something this carefully, there's always more than one reason. You crouch by a shrub dotted with buds, champa, also known as frangipani. Its pale blossoms won't open fully until the air warms. In some traditions, this flower is offered at temples. In others, it's tucked behind ears. Today, it's just quietly preparing to perfume the entire east side of the garden. A distant bell rings, not for prayer or court summons, just a brass wind chime near a gardener's hut swaying gently in the morning breeze. It reminds you that while emperors once sat here discussing philosophy or expanding maps with casually imperial flourishes, someone always had to water the marigolds. You pass a small rectangular basin, catching a perfect reflection of the lightning sky. Your own face floats next to that of a tree. Neither of you moves. You could sit here forever and not be noticed, which, in this garden, is precisely the point. It was meant to blur human presence into the landscape, to quiet you, like a whispered lullaby in reverse, waking you softly into a still world. And still it is. Even the wind here has manners. It tiptoes across the lilies, stirring a single loose petal. You notice a snail negotiating a dew-slick flagstone with tragic determination. You wish it well. It does not respond. A squirrel streaks past your foot like it's late for a tax appointment. You almost jump, but then remember in the grand scale of Mughal elegance, panic has no place. You steady yourself with one deep breath, watching the sun finally graze the edge of a domed pavilion in the far corner. It's officially morning now. You are barefoot, awake, and surrounded by history, and you haven't even reached the mango trees yet. You follow the curve of the sandstone path, and with each step, the garden begins to reveal its hidden language, a geometry of calm. The layout seems effortless at first glance, like nature just happened to fall into perfection. But the longer you walk, the more you sense the hand behind it. Squares become rectangles, then bisected triangles, then mirrored shapes arranged so precisely that even the breeze seems to obey their symmetry. This is no accident. Mughal gardens were designed with mathematics in mind. The charbagh isn't just four patches of green, it's a spatial philosophy. The basic form, a cross-axial layout with two main walkways intersecting at the center, divides the space into four equal quadrants. Each is further subdivided, sometimes again and again, until the garden feels like a living mandala. From above, the layout mimics sacred diagrams from Persian and Indian cosmology. It's a reflection of the universe, rendered in turf and tile, of course, from ground level. All you really notice is how even the grass seems to grow in perfect rows. Somewhere, a Mughal architect is still smug about that. You turn left, and suddenly the hedges part to reveal a sunken square of flowering beds, bordered by low stone walls just tall enough to sit on. You take a seat, it's behind you. A row of cypress trees forms a boundary, while to the front, four narrow channels intersect at a central lotus-shaped fountain. This is the garden's heart, a still, silent core where water and stone meet at exact right angles. But it's not all austerity. Mughals liked their precision softened with lushness, so within these sharp lines, you find tulips nodding in the breeze, and curling tendrils of creepers crawling up the back wall, red poppies, golden zinnias, and tiny forget-me-nots form little bursts of rebellion. Nature, it seems, is gently ignoring the blueprint. You stretch your legs, The stone beneath you is inlaid with black and white marble tiles, cut into 8-pointed stars and rosettes. This too is intentional. Islamic geometry was central to Mughal aesthetic. It wasn't just about decoration, it was a meditation, a way of showing that within infinite patterns there is divine order, or, if you're feeling sleepier than spiritual, just a really pretty floor. There's a tree to your right that seems to be standing in exactly the same spot as another one on your left. You measure the steps between them, 13. You measure the next row, 13. You realize, with mild surprise, that this garden may be better at math than you are. Historians still debate whether the symmetry was meant to be symbolic, functional, or merely pleasing to emperors with control issues. Some argue the layout served irrigation needs, others insist it reflected theological ideals, and a few romantics believe it was meant to comfort the mind into balance. One theory suggests that symmetrical gardens were meant to tame the chaos of the world, a royal illusion of peace in a life filled with uprisings, rival suns, and unfortunate mango allergies. You continue walking, passing by a long corridor of flowering shrubs. Each one is planted exactly a hand's width from the next, not an inch off, and yet somehow it doesn't feel rigid. There's softness in the repetition, like lullabies, or staircases that always creak the same way. You pause at a circular plot inlaid with concentric rings of stone. In the center stands a young neem tree. Its leaves shift slightly in the wind, and a few fall near your feet, landing precisely between the lines. You begin to suspect this garden is having a bit of fun with you. Beyond it, a set of domed chhatris, small open pavilions, frame the sky with quiet grandeur. From this angle, their placement forms a diamond shape across the garden. You step into one and sit on the cool marble bench inside. The dome above is intricately carved with geometric rosettes. Light filters through carved yali screens, those perforated stone panels that turn sunlight into lace. You tilt your head. The shadow on the floor looks like a flower slowly blooming. You rest your head against a column, and for a moment, the garden spins, not with motion, but with meaning. Everything aligns. The channels, the plants, the trees, the light. You're sitting in a space where order wasn't just drawn, it was planted, watered, trimmed, aided by thousands of unseen hands who understood that calm can be constructed. And just when you're lulled into that reverie, something tugs at your awareness. A distant cough, a rake being dragged across gravel. The day's caretakers are beginning their quiet choreography. You stand. Your fingers brush a vine curling up the column, its tendrils gripping the stone like a sleepy child clutching a blanket. You smile to yourself. Whoever designed this space understood that stillness isn't empty, it's patterned. And as you walk on, a thought settles gently over you. Symmetry here isn't perfection. It's peace in repetition, quiet in order, calm, drawn one line at a time. The path dips slightly, and you follow the sound of trickling water to its source. Here, water isn't just hydration, it's language. In the Mughal garden, it speaks in murmurs, in turns, in perfectly measured splashes. You arrive at a slender channel where the current slips past polished stone like a long exhale. This isn't a stream by accident. It's a deliberate feature of what Mughals called the Nahar, a system of gravity-fed water channels designed to irrigate, cool, and soothe. The Mughal engineers weren't merely gardeners, they were dreamers with blueprints, using aqueducts, underground clay pipes, and stepped channels. They directed water from nearby rivers or wells with startling precision, downhill, around corners, and into fountains that bloomed like lotus buds every few meters. You crouch beside the water, fingers hovering over the surface. It's clear and impossibly still in the middle, where the base is painted with a faded cobalt glaze. At its edges, tiny ripples catch the early sunlight like threads of silver embroidery. Mughal philosophy held that running water purified the soul. Even the Quranic vision of paradise is filled with rivers, flowing beneath trees, within walled gardens, across the feet of the faithful. So when Babur, the first Mughal emperor, wrote about the gardens he missed from his native Fergana Valley, he always mentioned water. In his memoirs, he mourned the absence of clean streams and the hardship of Indian dust. It wasn't long before he began carving channels into the land, sketching dream gardens over old soil. You stand and follow the channel as it forks, each tributary sliding between beds of saffron crocus and narrow reeds. Some pools are still shaded by fig trees, others left open to sky so the water can mirror the clouds. At each turn, the water takes on a new voice. A trickle becomes a gurgle. A quiet splash becomes a polite hiss. It's almost musical. If your ears are still soft with sleep, a heron stalks the edge of one pool. It sees you. It doesn't care. Mughal gardens were once filled with birds like this, both wild and invited. Emperor Jahangir, a notorious nature enthusiast with a fondness for opium and flamingos, kept detailed records of the animals that lived in and around his palace gardens. In one account, he describes a Saras crane so tame it would drink milk from a silver cup. Not everything in the garden was tame, though. Historians still argue whether the imported cypresses and pines of some gardens were meant to establish imperial dominance over the native landscape or simply to indulge royal nostalgia. Persian influences clashed with local Indian traditions. But in this moment, as a squirrel skitters across a stone lip and a water lily opens with quiet confidence, you suspect the debate would have bored the lilies to sleep. The channel turns again and runs beneath a tiny bridge, just two carved planks held together with age and moss. You cross it, noting how the water narrows beneath you, speeding up slightly. Mughal builders often played with hydraulics, not just for irrigation, but to slow or quicken water, to vary the sound, to create little dramas in what otherwise looked like serenity. A soft mist rises from one shallow basin where the water strikes a scalloped stone rim. You lean close. The sound here is more than gentle, it's hypnotic. This is what 17th century travelers once wrote about when describing the singing water of Hindustan. It's also probably what gardeners heard while pretending to weed and actually dozing off under the eaves. You find a ledge nearby and sit, letting the back of your neck cool in the rising breeze. Around you, birds chirp and warble, each one adding a note to the garden's waking symphony. You try to name them, but they slip through memory like poetry half remembered. The Mughals thought of water as both a physical and metaphysical connector. It linked quadrants of the garden, tied together symbolic meaning, reflected the heavens, and quenched the roses. But it also blurred edges between architecture and environment, order and softness, empire and earth. You watch a dragonfly skim the water's edge, casting a perfect shadow that momentarily breaks into fragments on a ripple. The effect is fleeting, like a riddle solved and forgotten in the same breath. You let it go, further ahead, The channel disappears into a raised stone basin, a hooze. These were reservoirs, both practical and ceremonial. Some were filled with rose petals on feast days. Others served as mirrors for imperial moon-watching parties. The basin before you is empty now, save for a few fallen leaves. But the structure remains, perfectly octagonal, lined with inlay work of lapis and jade that only the sun can fully reveal. You circle the basin, letting your fingers trail along the grooves of once polished marble. A bee hums past your ear, nosing toward the last of the wild jasmine. You whisper a greeting. The bee has business elsewhere, by now. The water's voice has become part of your breath. Every step you take is met with a soft, aquatic punctuation. It's not background noise. It's architecture for the ears. And as you move farther, past the pools and under a flowering arch, the hush that follows feels immense, like someone just closed a book mid-sentence. The silence invites you forward, so you go, not hurriedly, not aimlessly, but as if drawn by something gentle and flowing just out of view. You pass beneath a trellis woven with climbing roses, pale pink, almost white, with petals as thin as rice paper. Their scent is delicate but steady. It floats up with the heat of the early sun, mingling with the dampness of the stone and the faint mineral trace of water. You stop and breathe it in. This isn't a garden that overpowers you with fragrance. It lingers instead. The scent here is layered, like silk scarves stacked in a drawer, each holding some memory of its last wear. Earthy marigolds, sweet jasmine, and the spiced wood of sandal trees create a slow crescendo. You begin to understand that in Mughal gardens, scent wasn't background, it was intention. The Mughals were obsessed with perfume, and not just for themselves, though yes, emperors were known to bathe in rosewater and carry sachets of crushed cardamom beneath their robes. The gardens themselves were composed as olfactory experiences. Flowering plants were arranged in sequences, some to greet the morning, some to bloom with heat, others to release scent only after dusk. The effect, a fragrance clock. You crouch beside a low bed of Rajnigandha, tuberose. Its blooms are still curled tight in the cool air, but their waxy stems already hint at what's to come. By mid-afternoon, they'll unfurl and flood this entire corridor with their creamy, narcotic perfume. The Mughals believed tuberose calmed the heart and sharpened dreams. You try to imagine walking this path at sunset, lantern in hand, scent trailing you like a second skin. Historians still argue whether certain blooms were cultivated locally or imported from Persia and Central Asia. It's true that Babur missed the violets of Samarkand and that Jahangir ordered orange trees from Kabul. But Indian gardens soon developed their own floral dialects, combining native jasmine, hibiscus, and champa with imported tulips and narcissus. The result was botanical fusion, centuries before that phrase was ever ruined by a restaurant menu. You step away from the tuberose and pass a small alcove where a cluster of marigolds has grown unexpectedly wild. Bright orange petals spill over the edge of their neat bed, reaching greedily toward the path. These weren't part of the original plan, but no one seems to mind. A gardener's broom has swerved around them. Even order makes room for enthusiasm. Further along, a patch of saffron crocus is just beginning to open. Their purple flowers cradle slender red stigmas, delicate threads that once sold for their weight in gold. In fact, they still do. Mughal emperors prized saffron not only for its flavor and medicinal qualities, but for its symbolism, rare, radiant, and fleeting. One whiff was said to lift the mood of even the most brooding court poet. You lean in, they smell faintly of hay, honey, and something nearly metallic, like memory. Beyond them, you find a row of motia, Arabian jasmine, lined against a low boundary wall. These are the flowers that once perfumed the robes of queens and concubines, crushed into pastes and pressed into oil. Court records mention entire rooms filled with jasmine garlands during royal weddings, and silver trays heaped with petals to scent writing desks. One emperor even commissioned a perfumed pavilion, where each cushion, curtain, and canopy was laced with floral distillates. No pressure, a bee floats near your ear again. Or maybe it's a wasp. You pretend not to notice. The Mughals had a practical respect for insects, which, like imperial relatives, were best left unprovoked. As you continue walking, the scent thickens, more humid, more alive. You've reached the rose section, but not the tightly wound, shop-bought ones. These are ancient damask roses, loose-petaled and heady, their scent rich with clove and overripe fruit. You brush past one, and its softness stays with you, literally. A petal clings to your sleeve, like a well-mannered ghost. There's a stone plaque nearby, barely legible now, marking this as the evening walk, apparently. This part of the garden was meant to be enjoyed at twilight, when the heat lifted and the breeze stirred up scents stored in the soil all day. You pause to imagine nobles in embroidered slippers walking this very path, laughing behind fans, stopping to sniff flowers they'd seen 100 times before, still surprised. You sit for a moment on a bench carved with floral motifs, lotus, tulip, and pomegranate, all curling inward as if bowing to scent itself. You wonder what it must have been like to be a perfumer at the Mughal court, distilling oil drop by drop, boiling sandalwood and vetiver into essence, weighing spices with trembling hands. A single misstep, too much clove, too little camphor, and your blend might offend the wrong nostril. Talk about job pressure. And yet, scent here wasn't just indulgence. It was medicinal, ceremonial, devotional. Lavender soothed headaches. Basil warded off flies and ill fortune. Champa was said to encourage spiritual clarity. Every breath you take here is part history, part pharmacy. A gust of wind rises, lifting the scent from the beds and carrying it toward the central pool. You follow it, pulled by invisible threads, and when it fades, as all scents do, it leaves something behind. Not quite memory, not quite longing, just the quiet knowledge that someone planted beauty here, not to impress, but to comfort. You don't need to say anything. You simply keep walking, slightly slower now, letting the garden breathe around you. You spot movement ahead, not fast, not intrusive, but steady and rhythmic. It's the gardener, crouched over a patch of basil, his fingers coated in soil, his feet bare on the damp ground. He doesn't notice you at first, or maybe he does, but like everything in this garden, his response is measured. He rises slowly, brushing dirt from his knees with a practiced motion. His hands are weathered, not cracked, just worn smooth by years of watering, trimming, and nudging life back into symmetry. A clay pot rests beside him, half filled with compost made from crushed neem leaves, cow dung, and kitchen ash. You recognize the smell from childhood, or maybe just from somewhere primal. It's the scent of fertile work. He glances at you, nods once, then returns to plucking weeds so thin they barely exist. To him, This patch of garden isn't small, it's infinite. You crouch a short distance away, mimicking his stance without quite meaning to. Your knees pop. His do not. He hums softly under his breath. Some tune passed from gardener to gardener across generations. The Mughals had entire hierarchies for horticulture. Gardeners weren't just laborers, they were artists, trained in pruning, scent pairings, seasonal rotation, and even how to bend branches to frame a particular line of sight. They kept handwritten records of what bloomed when, and which soil mixture yielded the boldest orange and marigolds. This man's shirt is faded to a color that might have once been blue, a hole at the elbow. His sandals are tied with reused twine, but as he wipes the leaves of a rosebush with a damp cloth, yes, a cloth, because rain spots stole the glow, you realize that what he tends here isn't just plants, it's mood. He straightens again and walks a few steps over to a narrow trench. From a nearby pitcher, he pours water with care that borders on reverence. You watch the liquid travel downhill with a gentle slosh, carrying with it tiny motes of silt that sparkle briefly before vanishing into the roots. Historians still argue whether the role of the Mughal gardener, Bagban, was purely technical or semi-spiritual. Some suggest they held knowledge closer to mysticism, with charts of lunar cycles, wind directions, and companion planning rituals that read like herbaceous astrology. Others say that's romantic nonsense, and they were just good at their jobs. You suspect both are true. He gestures toward a flowering hedge. You follow, curious, and find him pointing to a patch of nasturtiums that have been carefully guided to grow in a spiral. No support structure, just string, patience, and gravity. The effect is subtle, barely noticeable unless you're looking for it, which you are now. The gardener chuckles. Not loudly, just enough for the sound to travel across one flower bed and fall softly into the next. He moves on without a word, leaving you by a patch of herbs mint, basil, tulsi, each one trimmed low, but lush, with not a single browned leaf in sight. There's a tiny clay marker near the base of the tulsi. Someone has drawn a crescent moon on it, faded with time. You wonder if it means the plant was sown under a waxing moon, or harvested on a holy day. You consider asking the gardener, but he's already halfway across the garden, tending to a patch of unruly zinnias, like a parent scolding a too rowdy child. You sit again, this time near a trellis wrapped in morning glory. Its blooms open wide now, sky-colored and absurdly cheerful. A ladybug crawls across your ankle. You let it, in the distance. A pair of doves coo with the sleepy confidence of creatures who've never had to weed anything. The gardener hums louder now, still tuneless, still oddly perfect. You watch as he picks up a small pair of shears, snips 2 branches, and lays them gently on a stone slab. Ritual complete. You realize you've spent nearly 20 minutes watching him do what most people overlook care. Meticulous, tender care, given not for praise, not for spectacle, but because the garden depends on it, somewhere in the hedges. A breeze rustles. The scent of moist soil and fresh mint rises with it, and just like that, the gardener disappears down a side path, swallowed by green. You remain, filled not with awe, but something quieter respect. You brush dirt from your own hands and smile, a crooked, imperfect smile, just like the rose bush someone forgot to prune, and it's fine. In fact, it's perfect. You wander farther down the shaded path until your feet meet the edge of a cool marble platform. It's raised only slightly above the earth, yet it changes everything. Up here, your view expands. The trees frame the sky like a miniature stage, and the sun, still early in its climb, filters through layers of jelly screens that turn light into ornament. You step carefully onto the platform. The marble is chilled from the night, but warming rapidly. You feel the contrast: cool heel, warm toe, like the garden reminding you to pay attention. Ahead stands a domed pavilion, a chhatri, with slender columns and carved capitals shaped like inverted lotuses. It offers shade, yes, but also perspective. You sit. The stone beneath you is smoother than expected, worn down by centuries of silk-clad courtiers and embroidered cushions. The dome above collects sound in its curve. Your breath echoes back softly, as if the air itself has memory. This spot wasn't designed for rest alone. It was built for presence. Here, under this canopy, courtiers read poetry, discussed trade routes, watched the monsoon approach, or simply listened to fountains speak in rhythmic drips. Even emperors paused here, not to rule, but to feel ruled by calm. The Mughals weren't just kings, they were architects of mood. They knew that space could govern the mind, that symmetry could soften ambition, and that even the most powerful man in the empire might need a quiet place to pretend he wasn't in charge for a minute. You glance around. The pavilion is flanked by narrow channels, carved into the marble like veins. These once carried cool water beneath the floor, an ancient form of passive air conditioning. As water moved beneath your feet, it cooled the stone, carried scent, and offered gentle acoustics. Historians still debate whether this design originated in Persian gardens or was a uniquely South Asian adaptation. Some argue that the system was borrowed wholesale from Timurid blueprints. Others point to archaeological finds in ancient Indian stepwells that predate Mughal arrival by centuries, as always. The truth probably lives somewhere in the overlapping roots. You lie back against a sloped cushion someone has left behind, a little faded, but still soft. Overhead, pigeons circle the dome's rim. One lands with theatrical importance and coos. You blink. The air has thickened slightly, but not with heat. It's with stillness. From here, the garden shifts again. It becomes a room without walls. The square paths stretch like carpets. The plants become guests. The water, a gentle housekeeper, and you just a fortunate intruder, allowed to borrow this morning for a while. You let your fingers trace the grooves of the jelly screen beside you. Each pattern is unique, a lattice of stars, vines, or diamonds, not merely decorative. These screens modulate light and temperature. They also hide and reveal in turn. From the outside, you're invisible. From within, you see everything. It's a design of privacy, but not isolation. You think of the women of the Zenana, the royal harem, who once sat behind screens just like this, watching garden strolls, listening to court gossip carried on the wind, smelling rosewater poured into copper bowls. Their presence never official, yet always felt. A pigeon coos again, closer this time. You look over your shoulder. It's perched right behind you, entirely unbothered, feathers puffed in the rising warmth. You nod solemnly. It blinks once. Unimpressed? Fair enough. You turn your gaze back toward the edge of the platform, where sunlight now slices across the tiles in gold angles. The light catches fragments of inlay, tiny chips of turquoise, malachite, onyx, no bigger than fingernails, yet perfectly placed. You wonder who laid them, Was it one artisan, crouched for days with a chisel and glue, or a team, working in silent unison, drinking sweet tea between prayers? The colors seem to shift with each blink. It's not just light, it's memory pressed into stone. You imagine rain falling here, pooling briefly before draining away in whispered rivulets, leaving behind the scent of marble and mango leaves. Below the platform, the garden moves gently. A squirrel dashes between planters. A woman in a green shawl walks slowly down the path, pausing to examine a clump of marigolds with the seriousness of a scholar. A child's laugh echoes briefly, followed by a soft reprimand in a language you don't know, but understand anyway. You stay where you are, unmoving. There's no need to rise yet. In this garden, nothing demands urgency. Even the insects glide. Even the birds pause mid-song, as if reconsidering the next note. Eventually, a breeze slips through the lattice and brushes your face. It's scented faintly with camphor and basil. You inhale deeply, then, slowly, without intention, you close your eyes, not to sleep, but to steep in the quiet. And the marble beneath you holds your weight like it was waiting. You rise from the marble pavilion slowly, leaving behind the cool hush of the dome. The sunlight is stronger now, brushing the tops of trees and sparkling across the surface of nearby water channels. As you step down from the platform, a gentle rustling catches your ear. Someone has left a book resting on a small stone bench, its spine creased with use. Curious, you approach. The cover is bound in soft, worn leather, and though the script is faded, you can make out the calligraphy, Persian, looping and elegant. You flip it open and find a page filled with botanical sketches, not stiff diagrams, but lively renderings. Tulips with curling petals, almond blossoms mid-burst, even a playful note beside a saffron bulb harvest gently, or risk a scolding from the bees. You've stumbled across a court manuscript, or at least a copy of one. Mughal emperors, especially Akbar and Jahangir, weren't just garden enthusiasts, they were meticulous record keepers. Akbar kept scholars on staff to document everything from rainfall patterns to pomegranate ripeness. Jahangir, more artist than administrator, preferred to draw what he saw. He once commissioned hundreds of botanical illustrations for his personal archive, each flower identified by name, origin, and season of bloom. You turn another page and see a pressed bloom flattened between sheets. It's brittle, but still intact. Its label reads Gulisirk, Red Rose. Next to it, a line of poetry. Even the emperor bows to the rose when no one is looking. You smile. Whether this was written by a scribe, a gardener, or an idle noble hiding from court duties is impossible to say, but it's perfect. Historians still argue about who exactly authored many of these garden texts. Were they scholars, artists' royal family members under pseudonyms? Some claim they were ghost-written by hired poets. Others believe they were compiled collectively, over time, like garden paths that deepen with repeated steps. The manuscripts are both precise and deeply personal, a blend of science, mood, and whimsy. You glance back at the water. It reflects the white stone arches of the pavilion behind you, now softened in ripples. Another page in the book shows the cross-section of a mango seed. Another instructions for drying rose petals between layers of muslin. It's less an instruction manual and more a love letter to growing things. Farther down the bench, a rolled scroll peeks from beneath a cushion. You gently unroll it. revealing a watercolor map of this very garden, or one just like it. The central quadrants are drawn in four soft tones: green for fruiting trees, red for ornamental beds, blue for water features, and gold for pavilions. Tiny notations mark shade at sunrise, strong fragrance midday, and best moon viewing spot. It's a sensory chart, not a structural one, clearly made by someone who understood this garden as more than soil and stone. You lean back, still holding the scroll. A few bees drift past your ear, unbothered. Insects in Mughal gardens were not viewed as pests, but as pollinating partners. Some accounts describe gardeners planting specific flowers to attract butterflies during festival weeks. Others mention fireflies, caught and released for moonlit entertainment, nature's own lanterns. You think of Shah Jahan, builder of the Taj Mahal, who was said to sit in his garden sketching cypresses while his attendants fanned rosewater through perforated screens. His court poets wrote of gardens as libraries of fragrance, where one could read with the nose as well as the eyes. You close the manuscript gently and return it to the bench. Whether it was left here by design or forgetfulness doesn't matter. Like everything in this garden, it feels intentional, placed, not lost. As you walk on, the trees begin to shift, less ornamental, more practical. You pass groves of almond, fig, and mango. The air changes. It's sweeter here. A low-hanging branch brushes your shoulder. You duck beneath it, and a cascade of soft leaves follows, trailing across your back like a curtain. In the undergrowth, tiny birds flit from branch to branch, gossiping. A gardener in a faded red sash is collecting something in a shallow basket. As you pass, you glance down and see dried seed pods and fallen petals. Nothing wasted. Even the cast-offs are valued here, for compost, for decoration, for dyes. Waste would be almost impolite. You pause near a fig tree. A few fruits hang low, not yet ripe, but one has split from its weight, releasing a faint honey scent. You resist the urge to pluck it. In this garden, even temptation feels respectful. The path ahead narrows. To your right, a cluster of silvery-leafed plants catches the breeze. Sage, perhaps, or some Mughal-era equivalent. There's no label, just scent. This part of the garden doesn't need identification. You're meant to feel your way through. And then, just beyond the last mango tree, a small alcove opens, a recessed niche in the wall, shaded and silent within it. A worn cushion, a candle stub, and a single flower in a chipped vase. Someone else's reading spot, perhaps, or praying spot, or napping spot. You don't intrude, you simply note it. Another story growing quietly among the leaves. You move on, cradled by branches and shadow, and the memory of sketched flowers. You catch it before you see it. A scent drifting through the foliage, warm and faintly sweet. It's cardamom, unmistakably, and something richer beneath it, maybe almonds, or the toasted grain of morning bread. You follow it instinctively, letting your steps grow slower as the garden opens onto a quiet courtyard edged with terracotta tiles and soft patches of grass. At the far end stands a simple pavilion, no dome, no inlay, just shade and open walls, and under its roof, a low wooden table, neatly set with metal cups, a folded cloth, and two clay pots resting beside a small brazier. Someone's breakfast is about to begin. You move closer, and the scents sharpen. Warm milk, infused with crushed pistachio and a ribbon of saffron. A pan sizzles faintly. Bread is being heated, thin roti folded into quarters and brushed with a whisper of ghee. It's not feast food. It's morning food, quiet food. The Mughals knew how to throw a banquet. Yes, elephant parades, sherbet fountains, golden rice mounded with roasted quail. But their mornings were often gentle, built around routine. A courtier's journal from the reign of Shah Jahan describes early hours as that window before power, when even kings sipped tea before speaking. You sit on a nearby ledge, respectful observer. A man in a pale tunic crouches by the brazier, checking the coals. Another pours tea into a cup so small it could disappear into your palm. The steam rises slowly, carrying the layered perfume of cinnamon, cardamom, and clove. It's not spicy, it's comforting, like being wrapped in a blanket woven from old lullabies. Historians still argue what exactly comprised the royal breakfast. Some claim it included dried fruits, flatbreads, and curd sweetened with rosewater. Others suggest dishes varied wildly: saffron omelets one day, mango pulp and chickpea porridge the next. But nearly all agree on one thing: it began in quiet. A gardener walks past carrying a tray of almonds soaked overnight in copper vessels. He's humming. The almonds are not for a feast, they're for clarity, or so the Mughals believed. Soaked almonds, warm milk, and certain herbal teas were thought to prepare the mind for judgment, diplomacy, or long hours of poetry writing. You consider this and wonder what breakfast item might improve your inbox temperament. The man at the brazier turns flatbread with his fingers. No tongs, just skill. The smell deepens. It's the scent of warmth made edible. Another man places a handful of dates onto a silver dish, their skins slightly wrinkled, their color as dark as burnished copper. Dates were sacred and practical, food of prophets, fuel for travel, sweet enough to coax the day awake without overwhelming it. Nearby, a brass vessel holds cool water flavored with mint leaves. Condensation trails down its side, and you can imagine the Mughal emperors placing a hand to its surface before drinking, testing temperature not from suspicion, but preference. A quiet clink as two clay cups meet. Someone laughs, a single syllable, soft and private. No pageantry, no courtly flourish, just two people drinking tea, somewhere between their first and second thought of the day. You close your eyes and imagine being part of that rhythm, waking with the birds, bathing in water chilled overnight in a shaded basin, dressing in linen that smells faintly of cedar, eating nothing extravagant, just flatbread, warm milk, a piece of fruit still wearing its morning dew. The Mughals believed breakfast shaped the rest of the day, not just in appetite, but in temperament. A bad breakfast, according to one royal physician, could harden the tongue and soften the reason. You think back to your own breakfasts and nod grimly. Fair point. There's movement behind the pavilion. A curtain lifts slightly, and a woman steps into view, shawl draped over her head, eyes lowered. She places a plate of pomegranate seeds onto the table and leaves without a word. Her steps are nearly silent. The only sound she carries is the faint rustle of silk and the brief glint of a toe ring in sunlight. Pomegranates were revered in Mughal culture, symbols of fertility, knowledge, and wealth. But more than that, they were loved for their precision. One court poet compared the seeds to rubies arranged in numerical perfection by divine hand. You pick one from the dish, just with your eyes. Imagine the crunch, the burst of tartness, the whisper of sweetness tucked inside. A cat appears. Of course it does. Silky, indifferent, and entirely at home. It weaves through the table legs and flops beneath the brazier like it owns the garden. You envy it briefly, then realize You're doing nearly the same thing, lounging, observing, thriving in shade. One of the men pours a final cup of tea, sets it on the ledge near the pavilion's edge, and walks away, an offering, a routine, a placeholder for someone who's yet to arrive. You'll never know. But the cup steams quietly, untouched, as if the garden itself might eventually sip from it. You remain a while longer, the scents fading and returning with each breeze. When you rise, your limbs feel looser, your thoughts lighter. Perhaps it's the cardamom, or perhaps it's just this the reminder that a good morning is made not of urgency, but of warmth shared in silence. You turn from the scent of tea and warm bread, drawn by a gentle chorus of birdsong that weaves its way through the hedges. It isn't loud, just persistent, like someone practicing a flute 2 courtyards away. You follow it with easy steps, and soon the garden opens again, this time into a shaded grove where the sun only dabs through in brief, golden patches. Here, the world feels quieter still. The gravel underfoot gives way to packed earth, soft and forgiving. The air is cooler. You hear silk rustle somewhere ahead before you see them. 2 women walking slowly beneath a flowering tree, their heads bent together in easy conversation. One wears pale blue muslin, the other something close to ivory, sheer enough to let light through. Neither looks in your direction. You're not part of their morning, and that's fine. You're simply borrowing the view. They walk with the kind of pace that assumes there's no need to arrive. Their slippers stir dust in precise semicircles. You hear a soft laugh. One of them has found something amusing in the other's words, and her hand brushes the leaves above her as if sharing the joke with the tree. This is the leisure of the Mughal elite, but not the public pomp of processions or court announcements. This is the quiet kind, slow walks, shaded benches, the unhurried exchange of stories in palace records. Women of the Zenana are often flattened into footnotes, gifted a parrot, commissioned a garden path, sent a letter written in clove ink. But here, in the garden, their presence is whole. The Mughals gave great attention to the feminine space of gardens. Zenana gardens were often enclosed, more private, filled with specific scents and sounds designed to soothe. Birds like the bulbul and the koel were deliberately encouraged with fruit-bearing trees and still water. Their songs weren't background, they were part of the architecture. You spot one now, a bulbul, its tail flicking as it lands on a thin fig branch. It looks around with the grave intensity only small birds can manage, then lets out a spiral of notes that rise like bubbles in a warm bath. Another answers from somewhere deeper in the garden. The 2 begin a call and response, their conversation far more practiced than yours. The women disappear into a corridor of trees, and you move on, finding a shaded bench beneath a neem. A thin shawl rests there, forgotten or left on purpose. It smells faintly of sandalwood and linen. You sit carefully, not disturbing it, and let your eyes follow the arc of a butterfly overhead, orange and black, floating like someone indecisive. Mughal gardens were full of creatures like this, not just tolerated, but welcomed. Manuals exist, in Persian and Urdu, explaining how to attract specific species of butterflies with marigolds, hibiscus, or strategically placed sugar water. Some gardens even had painted stone fruits left on the ground to trick bees into staying longer. Whether it worked, no one is sure, but the effort speaks volumes. Historians still debate how much daily access the women of the court truly had to these spaces? Were they confined to view from balconies, or did they truly walk these paths in early morning, accompanied by only a few attendants and the quiet bravery of shared stories? Some suggest they painted flowers on silk while sitting under the chhatris. Others argue their gardens were more imagined than walked. But here, among birds and blooms and drifting voices, you know the answer doesn't matter. Presence doesn't always require proof. You tilt your head and see something odd nestled in the crook of a tree branch, a spool of thread, wrapped in gold and deep maroon, perhaps left behind during embroidery, or maybe used for kite making. Both were common pastimes here. Women embroidered landscapes. Boys snuck away to fly kites between pomegranate trees. Once, an emperor famously banned blue kites because they distracted too many palace scribes from their duties. Another bird hops along a nearby stone ledge. Its feathers shimmer with shades of green that no pigment could match. It pecks once at a berry, drops it, then moves on. You follow its direction with your eyes and find another glimpse of silk in the foliage. More visitors, maybe more stories. You imagine the conversations held here, not declarations or edicts, but the small things. Who danced well at last night's music recital? Which cousin left too early? Whether the fig trees would yield enough for syrup this season? And always, always who said what, and to whom, and how loudly. A soft bell rings somewhere behind the trees. It's not a summons, just the sound of something changing. Perhaps the breeze, perhaps the hour. The shadows lengthen slightly, reshaping the pattern on the ground. The garden adjusts. You stand once more, leaving the shawl undisturbed. A single bulbul note follows your step. As if to mark your departure, you smile, not because you were seen, but because you were quietly accepted. And as you rejoin the wider path, the birds resume their chorus. The breeze carries a whisper of rose, and silk rustles behind the hedges, like water slipping through fingers. The garden path widens again, the earth giving way to flat stone tiles set in gentle lines that converge on a grand open space. You recognize it immediately, not because of its decoration, but because of how it makes you feel, exposed, some elevated, like standing on a stage. Only the audience is made of trees and sky. At its center is a large circular platform, surrounded by fountains now still, their spouts poised as if mid-thoughts. You walk toward it, noticing that the tiles underfoot shift from sandstone to marble, to inlaid slate arranged in starburst patterns. You reach the platform and sit at its edge. Before you, a ring of cypress trees stands in near perfect formation, each spaced with ceremonial precision. It's too exact to be accidental, too elegant to be merely decorative. This, you realize, was once a throne room. Not the kind with velvet cushions or golden steps, but one with birds for heralds, water for walls, and sunlight as spotlight. This is where the emperor would sit, not indoors, but here, among pomegranate trees and peacocks. Imagine holding court under a sky that answers only with clouds. The Mughals believed deeply in symbolism. To rule from a garden was to claim not just dominion over land, but over harmony itself. To sit on a marble platform surrounded by flowering trees, birdsong, and geometric water channels was to say, even nature acknowledges my reign. You lean back on your hands. Around you, faint outlines remain where carpets were once laid, thread patterns pressed gently into the stone by decades of footfall. This was not just a backdrop. This was power, softened by petals and filtered through mist. The garden didn't temper the emperor, it crowned him differently. Historians still debate the extent to which Mughal rulers used gardens as official meeting spaces. Some records suggest Babur preferred military tents, while others claim Shah Jahan held audience in garden courts every morning. The truth, as ever, likely shifted with the emperor's mood, but the symbolism was constant. A ruler who governed from a garden claimed not just territory, but timelessness. You imagine it now. Courtiers in long embroidered robes approaching with careful steps, scrolls in hand, their words rehearsed, but their eyes darting toward the swaying trees. Ministers murmuring decisions while bees hovered between lotus blossoms, royal decrees signed to the background noise of fountains. There's something quietly radical about it, to remove walls from power, to meet politics with birdsong, to make decisions in a place designed for stillness, not drama. Perhaps the garden made them better rulers, or at least better listeners. A breeze crosses the platform, lifting the edge of your robe. You rise and move to the spot where the emperor's seat once stood, marked now by nothing but a slightly sunken tile. You stand there, gazing down the long axis of the garden. The paths align perfectly. Water channels draw the eye forward. Trees flank both sides like courtiers frozen in attention. It's humbling and a little theatrical. You look down and notice a small tile bearing the faint impression of a pomegranate. The fruit appears again and again in Mughal design, carved into stone screens, embroidered into garments, painted into manuscripts. It symbolized abundance, yes, but also complexity. Many seeds in one shell, much like a court, much like an empire. Nearby, an old brass lamp stands unlit, its base tangled in morning glory vines. It's been years, maybe centuries, since anyone used it, and yet it remains, a quiet relic of evenings when garden courts were lit by oil and moonlight, when poets recited under trees, and emperors pretended not to cry at the verses. You step off the platform and find a bench tucked beneath a thick-leafed almond tree. You sit, still within view of the court space, but shaded now, quieter. A bird lands on the back of the bench, fluffs its feathers, and then flies off without fanfare. The light has shifted again, everything golden now, angled and generous. You feel it on your arms, your face, the tops of your feet. This throne room, this heart of the garden, doesn't need guards or velvet ropes. It's ruled by whoever is quiet enough to notice its rhythms, and as you rise once more, your steps echo faintly across the marble, not with grandeur, not with authority, just with presence. That's all the garden ever asked for, and all it ever gave. You drift past the marble platform, leaving behind the quiet theater of power, and wander down a path lined with stones that feels subtly uneven underfoot, as though deliberately placed to slow you down. It works, your pace shifts, your breathing eases. And then you notice something curious beneath your feet. The tiles here are no longer simple geometric shapes. They're intricate, interlaced stars, serpentine vines, and half sunbursts arranged in patterns that seem too perfect to be guessed and too complicated to be fully understood. You crouch, tracing a motif with your finger. It winds in on itself, never quite repeating, never quite ending. This is no decorative afterthought. This is cosmic geometry. The Mughals, like many cultures before and after, believed that the garden was not just a place of beauty, but a mirror of the universe, this one, laid out in precise quadrants, with pathways that reflect cardinal directions and trees aligned to celestial markers, is not merely for walking, it is for contemplation, for remembering your smallness, your place in the pattern. You follow the path to a stone disk half embedded in the earth, ringed with symbols that don't belong to any single script. They appear abstract, lines, crescents, stars. Maybe they're astrological, maybe they're just art, either way. They draw the eye. You stand at the center of the disk, and everything around you feels different. Trees line up, shadows tilt just so. For a moment, you feel like you've stepped into a sundial built for the soul. Historians still argue over how much of Mughal garden design was cosmological. Some see only aesthetic choices. Others point to ancient Persian texts that speak of paradise as a mathematically precise orchard. There's even a theory that some gardens were laid out to mimic star constellations, each tree a planet, each path a celestial arc. The evidence is patchy. The feeling, however, is unmistakable. You move on, and the garden plays along. A fountain comes into view, not central like the earlier ones, but offset, quiet, as though it's thinking. Its water arcs gently, falling into a circular pool etched with tiny fish. They aren't real, just carved. Their scales made of tiny green stones. The water glides over them, catching the sun, making them shimmer as if alive. A breeze moves through the trees, and you catch a glimpse of something swaying, a set of bells hanging from a wooden beam. They ring gently, not in melody, but in sequence, like a language you don't speak but still understand. The wind activates them, not people. Sound here isn't performed. It's ambient. It drifts. It waits. You sit on a nearby stone, realizing it, too, is inlaid, not with patterns, but with an old inscription. The words are barely visible, smoothed by time and wind and maybe dozens of sleeping cats. Still, you make out the shape of a verse. To sit in silence beneath trees is to hear the sky exhale. You like that. Above you, a row of date palms reaches toward the sun with absurd confidence. Their shadows fall in long straight lines, like celestial sundials measuring the quiet between thoughts. You pause and trace the shadow of one leaf with your foot. It leads you to a circular basin, completely dry, its surface cracked. At first glance, it seems abandoned, but then you see it's ringed with stones shaped like stars, and in its center, a single white flower grows, unaided, untrimmed, and very much alive. There's a dignity in it, a whisper that the garden holds secrets long after the gardeners forget them. You notice how the paths around you form a rough mandala, 4 quarters, but each with its own mood. One corner filled with fruiting trees, another dense with flowers, a third dominated by stone, and this one, quiet, almost barren, but strangely resonant, the echo of something you can't name. You sit again, maybe for 10 minutes, maybe for 20. Time here doesn't track like it does elsewhere. The shadows lengthen slightly. A bee circles your head, decides against you, and disappears. You realize you haven't spoken aloud in a while, and yet, it doesn't feel like silence. It feels like dialogue, just not with words. The trees speak, the fountains murmur, even the stone beneath you seems to hum, very faintly, as if remembering the weight of someone who once sat here, hundreds of years ago. And as you rise, brushing dust from your palms, the alignment of everything, the paths, the shadows, the distant music of bells, guides you forward, not urgently, not commandingly, just gently, like gravity adjusted for serenity. You walk, knowing now that in this garden, Every step follows a line someone drew centuries ago, a line that meant something then and still does. The path leads you toward a corner of the garden, noticeably denser, where the plants grow a little closer together. The air thickens slightly, and the sun filters through in scattered rays. The edges of the garden blur here. It doesn't feel abandoned, exactly, but quieter, less clipped, less certain. You slow down instinctively. The scent changes, less floral, more herbal. There's something faintly medicinal in the air, like bruised mint and crushed marigold. Then you notice this part of the garden holds flowers not found in the main walkways, blooms that curl oddly, leaves with powdery finishes, stems marked with faint purple veins. You've reached the section once known, among gardeners, not officials, as the edge beds, a space reserved for experimental plants, rare imports, and occasionally forbidden blooms. You pass a shrub of night-blooming Rat Kirani, queen of the night. Its tiny white blossoms are closed, of course, waiting for dusk, but their stalks emit a ghost of the scent to come sharp, haunting, unforgettable. The Mughals admired it, but some considered its after-dark fragrance too strong, too suggestive, even disruptive. There were periods when certain perfumes were discouraged in the Zanana after sunset. Sensory discipline, they called it. Further along, you find Datura, angel's trumpet. The flowers hang like pale bells, upside down and absurdly elegant. You recognize it from a story Emperor Jahangir once fell ill after over-inhaling its scent. Believing it to be merely decorative, it wasn't. Datura is hallucinogenic, possibly toxic, yet it remains here, pruned, labeled in soft script, and oddly venerated. Historians still argue over the presence of these forbidden flowers. Were they banned formally, whispered about celebrated quietly in poetry, while being struck from garden plans? Some suggest that emperors encouraged the cultivation of these rarities in private plots, hidden from visitors. Others believe they were always part of the garden, just never acknowledged aloud. You stop at a bed of deep crimson poppies, each one bending slightly in the breeze, like it's bowing out of habit. Poppies weren't always welcome. Their association with sleep, with opiates, with memory, too many meanings, and not all of them polite. Yet here they are, planted with care, shielded by taller shrubs, as if hidden in plain sight. A small bench sits just beyond the poppies. You lower yourself onto it carefully. There's moss growing at the edges, not decorative, actual moss, the kind that appears when things are left alone for just long enough to forget they were curated. You run your fingers through it. It's soft, damp, alive, to your right. A single blue lotus blooms in a stone basin filled with still water. This flower is sacred in many traditions, though the Mughals, particularly Shah Jahan, prized it for aesthetic reasons. Its symmetry, its refusal to bloom where it's told. This one seems content. However, it floats quietly, its reflection intact. You close your eyes and imagine a royal herbalist walking these paths, basket in hand, collecting petals and powders, reciting combinations under his breath. Cardamom for digestion, saffron for mood, rose for the skin, datura, only in moderation. One wrong pairing, and instead of a courtly pick-me-up, you have an emperor who thinks he's a crane. A squirrel rustles through a low branch and knocks a seed pod onto the stone. It breaks with a sound sharper than expected. You jump slightly, then laugh at yourself, even here, in the garden's most secretive corner. Squirrels remain chaotic neutrals. You rise and find a wall alcove nearby, its niche shaped like a flower. Within it rests a dried bouquet, carefully arranged, though long past bloom. You wonder who placed it. A gardener, honoring a rare species. A visitor with too many thoughts. A tribute to something that can't be named aloud. The plants here aren't flashy. No tulips, no roses arranged by royal decree. These are quiet flowers, intense, introspective, the kind you remember hours after leaving, the kind that smell like lost pages. You step away from the alcove, and your path narrows once more. This edge of the garden is intentionally imperfect. Its beauty is in the tension between cultivated and wild, celebrated and censored, remembered and nearly erased. And as you exit, returning to the more symmetrical heart of the garden, a final scent trails behind you, sharp, citrusy, unplaceable. You don't look back. Whatever flower released it did so on its own terms. You leave the edge beds behind, stepping into sunlight that suddenly feels sharper, more honest. The garden shifts once again, less perfumed, more grounded here. The symmetry frays just a little. A hedge has overgrown its corner. A stone tile sits slightly askew. A vine snakes down from a pergola, refusing to follow orders. You've reached the part of the garden that remembers, the part that endured, not in flawless preservation, but in patient survival. Cracks in the path, lichen spreading like a map, and there, ahead, a broken wall, leaning slightly, its plaster flaking to reveal older layers beneath. This isn't disrepair, it's history made visible. You approach the wall and place your hand against it. It's warm, despite being in shadow. You can see where someone once carved a poem into the stucco, its lines faded now, a few characters legible, the rest softened by time and rain. One word remains clear, Rahmat, mercy. You whisper it aloud, and the garden offers no reply. It doesn't need to. Mughal gardens were never static. They were invaded, rebuilt, lost, reclaimed. When empires shifted, when invaders tore down the fountains or rechanneled the water, the gardens suffered first. They were visible symbols of power, of pleasure, of philosophy. What better thing to erase? And yet, here it still is. You walk further and find a once grand staircase, just 5 steps leading to a ruined platform. Vines curl between each slab. One is cracked in two, the halves now held together by roots. You climb it slowly, more from instinct than purpose, and sit at the top. From here, you can see the whole sweep of the garden again. If you squint past a few overgrown branches, you can imagine the invasions, armies moving through with banners, horses, confusion, gardens trampled beneath boots and hooves, trees felled not out of need, but statement, a conqueror declaring, "This beauty isn't yours anymore." And then someone came back, a gardener, a widow, a child, someone with a seed in their pocket and no desire for permission. They planted again. The empire may have changed, but the soil remained, and the jasmine didn't care whose name was on the coin. Historians still debate how many Mughal gardens were restored versus replaced. Some were absorbed into British colonial landscaping schemes. Others fell to private hands, their symmetry forgotten beneath apartment blocks or parking lots. But a few, like this one, survived quietly, ignored long enough to escape reinvention. You notice a fig tree nearby, gnarled and defiant. It grows sideways out of the broken base of a wall, its roots exposed, its leaves thick. It should have died decades ago. Instead, it thrives, not despite the damage, but because of it. A stone basin near your feet is dry, filled only with brittle leaves and a single fallen pomegranate, split open. Its seeds glisten in the sunlight. Ants move through them like pilgrims. The garden feeds everyone, even now. Further down, you spot a weathered plaque. The script is modern. Someone added it later. It reads, "This garden has no owner. It only has caretakers." You nod without meaning to. Nearby, a boy and an old man pass slowly between trees. One carries a plastic watering can, the other a broom made of dried palm fronds. No uniforms, no audience, just the steady rhythm of care. You sit longer than expected, watching as a butterfly lands on your knee, stays, and flits away without drama. A dog appears, lies down in a patch of sun, and promptly falls asleep. The ruined wall behind you hums with bees you can't quite see. Eventually, you rise, brush dust from your hands, and begin walking again. Your steps take you past more reminders: an abandoned trellis half wrapped in bougainvillea, a cracked pot balanced on a tree stump, initials etched into sandstone, some in Persian, some in Hindi, some in English. All of them say the same thing: I was here. I loved this. And the garden answers, not with preservation, but with presence. It grows anyway. You turn toward a quieter path now, one not lined with stone, but packed earth, its edges flanked by squat hedges and rustling grasses. The garden no longer tries to impress you. It simply exists. You follow a winding curve past a few low fig trees, their fruit still green, their bark smooth like old leather. And then you see him. A man sits cross-legged beneath a neem tree, hunched over a large folio laid flat across his knees. He doesn't move, not even when a leaf lands on his shoulder. His brush glides across the page in gentle, steady arcs, and the rustle of paper is the only sound competing with birdsong. You edge closer, careful not to startle him. His hands are stained with ink, his robe smeared faintly with pigment, blue along the cuffs, ochre down the front. He's not painting a scene or a portrait. He's sketching a petal, one single petal, over and over again. You sit on a stone nearby, trying not to disturb him, and watch as he shades the curve with impossibly soft strokes. The result is neither photorealistic nor stylized. It's devotional. Every line drawn with the attention of someone who believes the petal itself deserves to be remembered. In the Mughal courts, scribes and illustrators weren't just historians, they were guardians of perception. They captured gardens, not with wide vistas, but with focused eyes: the structure of a leaf, the posture of a lily in monsoon, the curling tendril of a vine caught midair. Their work bridged memory and meditation. You glance at his open pages. Some are filled with botanical studies, rosebuds dissected by color, labeled with tiny looping Persian script. Others show weather notes, rainfall estimates, bloom predictions, dates written in quiet rows. It's a climate journal disguised as poetry. He turns the page, revealing a new sheet, blank but for a faint pencil grid. He dips his brush into a small pot, loaded with watered-down pigment, and begins to outline the first stroke of a zinnia. You've passed a patch of them earlier, bulbs, upright, with too many petals to count. But on paper, he draws it gently, as though the flower might flinch if rendered too quickly. Historians still argue about the role of these garden scribes. Some were official court artists, others were amateurs, clerks who loved lilies more than ledgers. There are entire manuscripts without author names, just initials, or none at all. Some folios are unsigned, not from modesty, but from the belief that the garden was the true author. The scribes merely translated. You lean in slightly and see the soft glint of gold flecks on one of the painted leaves. Not flashy, just enough to catch the sun. Gold wasn't just for royalty. In Mughal art, it was often used to suggest spiritual weight, to mark where the ordinary touched the eternal. A poppy leaf, a fountain ripple, a quiet moment between sun and shade. The man finally looks up, not startled, just aware, and gives you a brief nod. His eyes are gentle, his face lined not with age alone, but with focus. You nod back, no words needed. You are both witnesses here. He returns to his folio, unbothered by your presence. You glance around and notice a few of his tools spread neatly beside him, brushes with bristles trimmed to pinpoints, a small brass scale for weighing pigments, and a folded cloth patterned with ink blots, accidental gardens of their own. A butterfly lands near the edge of his book. He pauses, watches it, then flicks his gaze toward the actual flower patch nearby. Then, wordlessly, he adjusts a line in his drawing. The butterfly, apparently, had better ideas. You stay longer than you intended, watching the page fill slowly. Time in this part of the garden is measured not in hours, but in layers of color. One stroke dries, another begins. A thought emerges, then softens. Eventually, you rise. He does not. His work continues. You leave him there, beneath the neem tree, among the paper petals and the real ones, forever caught in the space between memory and ink. And as you walk away, you feel a strange kind of gratitude, not just for the flowers, but for the man who took the time to remember them properly. The path curls gently now, leading you past a grove of tall palms that sway without sound, their fronds shifting just enough to dapple the ground beneath your feet in irregular patterns of light. You don't follow it out of duty. You follow it because it feels like the only natural direction left, beyond the trees. The garden opens once more. A broad, rectangular pool stretches before you, lined with pale sandstone and bordered by 4 low platforms. The water is glass, clear, unmoving, impossibly still. It reflects the sky in perfect clarity, broken only when the occasional leaf lands and spins slowly in place. You approach the edge. There's no railing, no warning, just a few carved steps descending into the water. You sit beside them, close enough that your reflection joins the trees in the surface. Your breath slows. This is where the garden lets go. There are no visitors here now, no gardeners, no women in muslin, no scribes, just you, the water, and the sounds that barely exist, a faint chirp, a breeze gliding across the top of the pool, the low sigh of distant branches. You remember reading once that Mughal gardens were designed not to be walked through, but to be dwelled in, not admired, but experienced. And this pool, was often the final destination, the place where rulers, poets, scholars, and dreamers all came to let their thoughts ripple and vanish. You lie back, your shoulder blades pressing against warm stone. Overhead, the clouds drift slowly, or maybe they don't. Maybe it's the water, reflecting a sky that isn't in any hurry. The Mughals believed reflection was more than metaphor. Many of their greatest gardens ended in mirrored pools like this, surfaces meant to hold the image of the universe, a final symmetry, a gentle conclusion. You tilt your head to one side and spot something at the water's edge, a small copper bowl, just large enough for a handful of rose petals. It's half filled with water. The petals are faded, tinged brown at the edges, as though someone left them this morning, or perhaps last week. You resist the urge to touch them. Instead, you watch how they float, perfectly spaced, as if the water understands the choreography. You reach for a nearby stone, smooth and flat, and trace its edge with your thumb, not to throw, just to feel. Even the objects here seem reluctant to make noise. Historians still argue whether these pools were ever meant for bathing. Some say yes, ritual cleansings before prayers or poetry readings. Others insist they were purely symbolic, untouchable. But what's clear is this: the pool was a pause, a chapter's end, a moment to witness without altering. The sun is high now, but the garden doesn't heat up with it. The trees provide enough shade. The water cools the air. You feel the balance everywhere, in the placement of the shrubs, the arc of the clouds, the weight of your body against the stone. Time does not move forward here. It swirls, it pools, and eventually it quiets. You glance into the water one last time and catch your reflection. Not crisp, not sharp, but softened, blurred just enough to remind you that even here, you are part of something larger, something quiet, something deliberate. And then, without ceremony, you stand. The garden stays behind you, or maybe it comes with you. It's hard to tell now. The scent of jasmine lingers. A single cypress casts its shadow like a sundial. Somewhere, a bird calls once, but then stops. You walk slowly toward the exit path. No grand gate awaits you. Just the same worn stones, the same old hedges, and the knowledge that every step you've taken was on ground drawn, planted, and tended with care centuries ago. You breathe in, the air tastes of dust and blossoms. You breathe out, and the garden exhales with you. You find a final bench near the garden's edge, low, uncarved, half covered in shade. You ease into it slowly, feeling the stone give nothing, but also ask nothing. The garden is still here, breathing around you, not for display, not for purpose, just being. You let your hands rest on your lap, palms open. The breeze moves gently across your skin, wrapping you in something softer than warmth, but warmer than silence. You don't look for meaning anymore, not in the placement of trees, not in the hidden inscriptions, not in the way the light curls around the edge of the reflecting pool. Everything has already spoken, and now it simply hums, somewhere behind the hedges. Water murmurs in channels you no longer see. The birds have gone quieter. A butterfly dances just above your shoulder, then drifts off, no longer needing an audience. Your breathing slows without effort. Your thoughts loosen. They don't vanish. Exactly. They settle. You close your eyes. The garden continues. Maybe someone else will walk this path tomorrow. Maybe no one will. It doesn't matter. The garden isn't waiting. It just is. And in that quiet, beneath old trees and long forgotten flowers, you feel your own roots take hold, not into soil, but into calm. You've arrived, and though you don't need to move, or speak, or think, you feel held. The stone beneath you, the wind around you, the scent of jasmine still whispering from a place you passed hours ago. Sleep doesn't come suddenly. It comes like shadow, like a petal falling, like the ripple of still water touched by nothing. The garden stays with you. It always has.